Good day, everyone. Welcome to the virtual concert halls. I'm Anna Ospinskaya greeting you live from Vienna, Virginia. Our online broadcasting platform is dedicated to streaming live performances and panel discussions. We connect musicians with their audiences and with each other. We are an independent virtual stage for classical musicians, educators of all instruments and music related disciplines, for music promoters, supporters, and music lovers. Our today's guest is Katie Beardsworth, joining us from the UK. She's the author of the series of podcasts Music Works, which is produced for you in collaboration with Polyphony Arts, the music management agency based in the United Kingdom. Let's welcome our guest, Katie. This is so wonderful to have you again. Welcome
Hello.
again.
Thank you.
Katie, you're the author of this fantastic series, Music Works. I love the name of it. Music does work.
That's what we hope so, don't we?
Yeah, that's what we believe, and that's what we see in the world. Um, and you've been bringing some extraordinary guests to these podcasts. Musicians from all walks, performers, orchestra musicians, members of musician unions, and music managers as well, and business coaches who work with musicians. It's just an extraordinary array of participants. I want to ask you, I know you have not done podcasting for 10 years. This is something new. You decided to take Polyphony Arts into a new field. Why did you start the podcast?
Well, I started it because I did a live series on Facebook during the first lockdown. And through that, I really just wanted to connect with the people that I knew in the industry that were all struggling and all experiencing it in different ways, both personally, professionally, and so on. And I just felt that these conversations were worth having in a public forum because we can only help each other by seeing, that we're all kind of in it together and feeling various things in various ways and so on. So I started doing a Facebook Live series with me and my team, interviewing all sorts of people from the classical music industry and the arts world more generally. And somewhat unexpectedly, I really got a bug for it. And I wanted to create a podcast because I felt that it would give more people the opportunity to listen. So many more ways you can listen when it's a podcast, and it's on all those audio platforms and so on, as well as the video that we're presenting here. So yeah, essentially I just wanted to keep doing it. I wanted to formalise it into a series and give it a name and so on. And it's it's been hugely rewarding and really beneficial to me in terms of navigating the COVID-19 various stages of lockdown and what's happening with the music industry, and so that I can essentially help the people that I work with, my clients and connections, navigate it as best they can.
That's incredible. Through working with you and your guests, I myself am learning incredible amount of helpful information, and the opinions which you bring. People who come to your podcasts are bringing their view of potential solutions to a whole different array of aspects of what needs to be solved. It's not just like one problem. It's a whole list of problems which we need to work on solving. And each one of those of people who bring in puts a spotlight on one of those problems, and by all means they bring their prospective solutions to that, and that I really appreciate that. It's been hugely rewarding kind of work for me as well to be part of that, and for my
So
team.
glad.
Yeah, we are applying the advices from your guests to our own daily work.
Well, I'm really glad. It's such a brilliant collaboration. The platform that you have here is really unique, and it's a huge pleasure to work with you on producing this.
Thank you. Now we're going to show the fourth episode of Music Works. Can you just give us a little outline of what's going to happen in that episode?
Sure. So this is the first episode that I've done where I interviewed someone who doesn't really work in the music industry. My guest on this episode is Jessica Fearnley, a business coach who works with women on their service-based businesses, and her sort of motto is work less, earn more.
That's a good one.
Yeah, it's one that doesn't always sit quite right with musicians, I think. But certainly for me, as someone who's trying to juggle a young family and a freelance career and, all the other things in life as well, it spoke to me when I was looking for somebody to help me improve my business, and the advice that she's given me over the few months that I've been working with her has really been invaluable. And one of the great things about Jessica is that she was, as a child, and right the way up until I think the end of school, she was very, very actively a musician and played in orchestras and really understands the process of growing up in the world of music, which gives her a lot of insight into the things that challenge us as musicians in the industry. But also critically, she now doesn't work in it anymore, which means that she can see the problems or the challenges and the solutions from the outside and from a world of business and business coaching. And this is really important because the music industry itself holds a great deal of culture around mindset, around money, around the value of hard work, around the value of contacts and connections, and just all sorts of things. And it can get very complicated, and in some scenarios you can get very bogged down in trying to work out how to solve problems that you're having with your career without really seeing how many of those problems are actually caused by the sort of general industry feeling rather than by anything that you specifically are doing. And yeah, that's why I think it's a great thing to get the perspective of a business coach on a music career in particular, because she sees so many perspectives from so many different industries, and she can see where the problems are actually things that you can fix yourself, and where they're things that the industry is telling you and maybe you can take some steps to address, but ultimately you have to kind of operate within that and just try not to let it get in your way. I feel as though I'm being vague, but
Exactly. And to me, the one of the very eye-opening insights was that one has to really understand also the difference between perceived problems and imaginary problems and the real ones which actually exist, and how to be able to discern one from another, because music industry in particular is filled with fantasy and attitudes which are not really built on the actual practical experience, but rather on more like a rumor and culture, like you said.
Absolutely. There are some really strong messages in the music industry, aren't there? The main ones that I can think of essentially are that there's no money in it.
Exactly, and it's a myth.
We all do it for love, so that we shouldn't get paid, because those two things can't go hand in hand.
They can haunt people's careers and their attitudes.
Absolutely. And even if they actively sort of reject that and notice that, it can still be really difficult to navigate an industry where other people think that, even if they don't, because you're constantly having to change hearts and minds as you go and kind of push back against
the culture.
Yeah, exactly. Quite.
That's incredible. I'm so looking forward to this episode again. It's very empowering. I hope musicians are watching and replaying these, because these are really practical tools which will empower so many people to really make steps towards much better life and much better careers and much more peaceful mindset.
Absolutely. And do you mind if I just say a bit about coaching as well?
Please.
I find that having had a coach for the first time in anything other than musical development, so a business coach, has been really transformative for me, and has made me see my work differently in almost every respect, and just so much more clearly and so much more likely to succeed. And I really can always advocate for Jessica on that. To the extent that I have started to offer coaching myself. So if you don't mind a shameless plug,
Please.
if you listen to this episode, watch this episode, and think that a coach might be for you, then do have a look at the Polyphony Arts website, where I'm offering a new coaching program. It's running at the moment, and the next intake starts in January.
Thank you. I'm going to be your client. Reserve a slot for me, please.
Always, Anna, always.
Thank you. It's so lovely to have you, Katie. And we will transition to the episode number 4 of Music Works. Hope you enjoy it.
Hello and welcome to Music Works, a podcast by Polyphony Arts. We're talking about the future of the classical music industry with some great guests. Thank you for joining us. Hello and welcome to Music Works, a podcast by Polyphony Arts. Today we're talking to Jessica Fearnley. Hi Jessica.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for coming. Jessica is a business coach who helps women build 7-figure consulting firms. She specialises in the transition from 6 to 7 figures in turnover and is an advocate for earning more by working less. And Jessica and I have been working together. She's my business coach. We've been working together for a few months now. And so unlike the other guests that we've had who are all musicians, Jessica is going to talk to us about the music industry from a business perspective. But of course, you do also have a musician perspective on this as well, don't you? As having done music as a child. So do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so music was my main thing actually until I was about 21. And I started off playing the violin. So I think I started lessons when I was about 7, and I was a very instinctive violinist. I just sort of picked it up and played. And yeah, there was that slightly screechy phase. But it's like I spoke the language of the violin, I feel. And so I had classical training with that. I also played the clarinet, and I did GCSE music, A-level music. My big failing as a musician is that I got terrible stage fright. So that made the performance element really difficult. I did a concerto when I was doing my A-level music, and just about managed not to faint as I was going through. But I've done a lot of the theoretical side. I've done my music theory exams, but also sort of GCSE and A-level theory, dictation, transcribing, those kinds of things. So I love music, but I think when I was younger, it played a really dominant role in who I was as a person, whereas now it's almost like my secret thing that I don't engage in quite as much in the same way.
I think it's quite uncommon for music and for kind of like business, as in hardcore business like you teach and like you coach people in, to meet. Apart from obviously within big music organisations, which obviously are businesses. But in terms of individual musicians, I thought it would be really useful for us to have a conversation about how that works, because I'm known for saying that musicians are their own businesses. Obviously, everyone who's a self-employed musician is a sole trader and therefore a business person. But I don't think that mindset is very prevalent. Again, obviously, there are people who treat it like that, absolutely. But I think there's a lot of work to be done there. And I wonder, what your thoughts are about that, as having come through a musical background, whether you have any thoughts on why that might be.
Yeah, so I think we tend to set the two things up in opposition. So like you can either be really rational brain, really good at business, really good at sort of the accountancy type people, or you can be your creative brain. And actually a lot of us were able to be more than one thing. And yeah, in some ways I'm highly creative. In some ways I'm highly rational, and I know that it's not just me. I think we all have elements of both, and it can be a bit nature nurture, can't it? Because I think it's almost the path that we end up on we're very susceptible to the messages that we receive when we are young and impressionable. And I don't know, I think like we've all known musicians and at times been musicians who, they're the eccentric, like slightly scatterbrained, stereotype that we love to have of, people who are highly creative, highly skilled in that area. But I don't think it has to be either or. I think like lots of us are both.
Yeah, I completely agree. And what do you think those messages are that we receive as children then about the music industry and
Well,
about sort of being a musician?
yeah, so I was sharing with you just now. One of the key things I remember growing up was I loved to play the violin. I come from a family where music was really enjoyed, valued, appreciated. But I remember being told very early on, you're really good at violin. Yeah, you definitely are, but like never pursue it as a career. That won't be something which is ever worthwhile. You'll end up either as a music teacher, or if you do really well, you might just get second chair in an orchestral situation as a violinist, but there will never be any money in it. So you'll have to do a lot of travel. It will be a very miserable existence. And so I guess you don't aspire to that necessarily, do you? And, even growing up, there was a girl in my school actually who she was just so wonderful at violin. She was way better than me. But I remember she played the Lark Ascending with our school orchestra, and it was just, even now I remember it was just the most beautiful thing. But she had no plans to go into music at all. She went to university and studied languages because she was kind of like, this is only ever going to be a hobby for me. And, to see that level of talent, as something which was not really taken seriously, I think it sends a very strong message. And so you can be very, I don't know, you can feel like if I choose this life, it's against the advice of everyone sensible in my life. And there can be that feeling of like, actually, I'm doing this against their advice. And so therefore I'm kind of out there on my own and it's going to be a struggle. And there's something very powerful, isn't there? That when we expect something to be hard, we also make choices every day which lead into that narrative. So it can become very self-fulfilling, I think.
Goodness, I completely agree. Yeah, there's just such a lot in what you've just said there, isn't there? And I think it's all about it's the power that the perceptions of other people can have on us as we're kind of growing up and learning what we're good at and what we enjoy doing. Because I personally don't think there's anything wrong whatsoever with being a musician and not having that be what you make your money from. I think that in many ways can be extremely fulfilling, and in every, and I also think there are a lot of problems with the perceptions that people have of what it's like to be a professional musician and how much money it's possible to earn and what the lifestyle is like and how much control you have over it. And I think there's sort of two things there. One is the perceptions and what they do to people who are going through making those kind of decisions, and also the fact that, I mean, some of those things are based in reality, in that, if you are the type of musician that tours, then you will probably not spend very much time at home, and that's like a lifestyle choice, that's not for some people and is for others. But then there's also the question of how much control we actually have over the industry as the people that are in it. Surely industries should accommodate people's choices. So really, do you want, great violinists opting out of the profession because they want to spend more than a few weeks per year at home, for instance? So I think, yeah.
And I think that's part of a wider shift that we're seeing across society and work generally. So I think, 50 years ago, there was the assumption that most people doing most jobs would be men. And now that women are a much, much bigger part of the workforce, I don't even know what the stats are, but like it's got to be 50-50 at least, hasn't it? But there is a real change in the way that all kinds of professions are handling this. So the work that I most often do is with corporate women who have left their main career, sometimes because of family pressures and family commitments that make it difficult to sustain that kind of long hours culture. But actually, that's something which is changing, and people are starting to say, look, if we want to hold on to this talent that we have and these amazing women, whether that's kind of women in the workplace in a corporate setup or women musicians, I think that people are starting to make changes, and women themselves are starting to say, actually, we want something more than just, you can have me until I have my first child and then I'll be in this kind of grey area for the rest of my life.
Absolutely. And hopefully also the shift towards men asking for these things as well.
Yeah, because it's
There's
not just mums, it's
yeah.
dads as well.
Well, I mean, it's so complicated, isn't it? But basically, the workplace is set up for dads or for men who don't mind if they continue to work really long hours once they have a family. And I think that the shifts that are happening are that the women that are in the workforce are asking more for what they need, but also hopefully the men as well are realizing that that it's not, you know, that gender imbalance is still very much present.
Yeah.
And it's not just children either, is it? Obviously, caring responsibilities and other
Yeah,
kind
that
of
can extend
life
to
things.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I think what I find really useful about working with you as a business coach is that you understand music and have learned music and been in music, and you also aren't you aren't in it professionally now, which means that those mindset things you can see them, but from the outside, the mindset things that musicians are experiencing.
Yeah.
So and I experience as well, although I'm not a performing musician as a part of my career. The mindset of the industry is also still present, obviously, in the way that I do my work. And you know, I just think the messages that we're told, and they come up so casually. I mean, I was even just having a conversation with a designer the other day, and she just kind of went, "Oh, well, I mean, we don't work in the arts to make money, do we?" And I just thought it just
Yeah.
kind of casually just comes out all the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think with, I don't know, so certainly my parents were really keen for me to do music, and both my parents are musical. So they used to say to me, "You've got a double gene for music." So it was kind of lots of positive messages in a sense, but I think what they really wanted me to do was get grade 8 certificates, which I have a little collection, and that's lovely. But it's kind of, as a musician, I mean, you know, I remember being in an orchestra and the conductor said, you know, we want to congratulate this guy in the trumpet section. The trumpets are always so loud, aren't they? I was always like, oh, it's so loud. But he just got his grade 8, and but then the conductor said, now remember, that doesn't make you a good musician. It starts after you get your grade 8, and everyone kind of going, we're not even there yet. You know, it's like this ladder that never ends. But I
Yeah.
don't think it's kind of that clash of expectations almost of like the outward certification that parents love you to collect. That's not really the essence of what it means to be a creative musician, is it? So there's lots of things that we have to separate out even before you get to that point of starting out as a musician in your own right.
Absolutely, and it's interesting, isn't it? Obviously, it is possible to achieve a grade 8 without necessarily having many of the things that is needed to be a professional musician, but also obviously it's also very much possible to do all of those things and get an even better grade 8. So that in itself is is complicated,
I
as
mean,
is
just the fact, you
in
know, like
general.
once, it's like anything, like once you pass your driving test, you don't, oh, that would have got me a minor fault or maybe even a major
Oh
fault
yeah,
as you're
yeah,
driving. But like, you know, the fact that in a music exam they give you a number out of 150 to say how well you've done, and you just think like, that's not, that goes against the entire essence of what it means to be a musician. Like, what did you make them feel? What did you convey? Like, you know, I've had music lessons where I've been playing a piece with my violin teacher, and both of us we've stopped and we've kind of gone, oh, that was emotional. And you know,
yeah.
you can't put a number out of 150 on that, can you? It's not really. So it's getting away from this kind of what's, you know, the school system is all about attainment, and that's not a bad thing actually. I think that gives people something to aim towards, but I think there is a bit of a clash there when you come to like musicianship and that kind of emotional communication that happens when you hear a performance, when you give a performance. So I think we need to tease out some of those things, and it's kind of understanding as well where that has taken us, as you're kind of growing up as someone who is being classically trained, because there are all these messages being fed in all the time. And I think part of becoming a grown-up musician is deciding actually what do they really mean and what do you really think.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. Somebody said, I had a conversation with somebody the other day about, I'm constantly having conversations about what makes um, it so difficult to articulate the value of music in a professional context, and why musicians themselves find it difficult to advocate for their own value, and why, you know, that kind of perpetual undervaluing of music goes on. And somebody said, well, when you're at school, you don't do, so like there's often an analogy which is said if you wanted 6 plumbers to come out and work on a Saturday night for 4 hours, you would never get them to you wouldn't get them to
Yeah.
be like, here's 50 quid and some exposure. That's not
Side chestnut. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But then, this discussion I had, so they said, yeah, but you don't join plumbing club at school, do you? And like then
You
do
don't.
concerts or do presentations of your plumbing skills in front of all your friends and all your parents and everything, and get certificates in plumbing, and then like move on from being an amateur or a plumber in training to be, in that public way, to being a professional plumber. It's just, there's something about the way we, that comparison, although I still think it's a good one, worth
That's a
and still
great one.
point it
Yeah, I
out
love
in,
that.
in certain moments. That actually this all does start from very, very young, because obviously most musicians start training very, very young. And it is something that we do, and we do publicly, and we do from being a child. Whereas, you might be good at maths at school and you might end up being an accountant, but you don't necessarily have to move from being, a performing child accountant to being a professional one, and making that transition into being paid for something that you've been doing for people already. And I think that transition and managing the expectations of moving into the professional sphere is a really pivotal stage for musicians. And I feel it's an absolute minefield, and there's a lot of what goes on in our own minds about that. Would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think our whole lives, whatever profession you go into, is dominated by the narrative that you tell yourself about who you are as a person and what you're able to achieve. And there's something there, isn't there, as a musician? If you're really talented, if you play and people, like I was saying with my friend who played the Lark Ascending, that has a lasting impact on people, and it kind of there's a certain star power that's available with that, isn't it? It has this magical sparkle that you never quite lose, and I think as musicians it's very easy to undervalue that and to just kind of go the other way, because the thing that people always say is there's 1,000 people who do what you do. Why would you be the one who gets the gig? And that there can be a version of that in all kinds of professions. So at one stage, when I was at university, I did a master's degree and I was looking at sort of PhD funding and that kind of thing. And one of my professors sat me down. He just said, there just aren't jobs for academics in the way that there used to be. And if you want to be in a situation where there are 90 people who've got better grades than you have, or exactly the same grades as you have, like, who decides who gets the job in that kind of situation? It's again, and it's funny, isn't it? Because that's a very similar narrative to what there can be. And actually, as it happened, when I left university and got my first job in London, I think 200 people applied for the job that I got, and I did get it. And so actually, straight away, it's kind of, yeah, the odds aren't always rational, or they don't always feel like they're in your favor. But if you're the right person at the right time, then actually all kinds of doors can open. And if you never even try, if you talk yourself out of it before you've even done anything, then I think that's a real shame. And it's that powerlessness that we can feel in just kind of thinking the world is not going to be receptive to the gift that I have. And I think that's a real that's a tightrope that you have to walk, I guess, as a musician, in seeing your own value and believing in that, even when other people maybe don't. And it's not even that you'd be in a job interview situation or sort of an audition situation and the people in the room wouldn't be rooting for you. But I think it's often family and friends who mean the best, who do the most harm, because they want to protect us from that disappointment. And I think often it can be complicated because, to a certain extent, we often want to protect ourselves from it as well. And so there's always different dynamics going on and different messages that we're receiving, but also telling ourselves inwardly. To try and break through a lot of that is really complicated. And it is something that, and I say this to my women consultants as well, who I work with. This is something that you may actually need to devote serious time to, is getting your mindset straight, because otherwise you will go around in circles, sabotaging yourself all over the place, and you'll keep thinking, that was perfect, but why did I, and it's not even that it doesn't work out, you don't get the offer. You get the offer and you say no, and then you don't know why you did it. or you say yes and then you hate it because you're convinced that you shouldn't have got it. It's all of these really complicated mindset dynamics that can play out because there's this battle internally between the life that we want to have and actually the life we feel that we are allowed to have. Does that resonate at all?
It really does, yeah, definitely. I think there's a huge amount, and this is utterly transferable to many, many careers, but certainly for musicians, you are essentially selling something that you kind of produce a sound and a feeling and everything like with your body, and it is so personal, and there's not a single performing musician who doesn't feel that. And so if somebody doesn't like it, it is a little bit like they don't like you. And I think that's the big worry. And I think, the way we raise budding musicians, the more I think about it, the more I think grade exams, or certainly certain approaches to grade exams, can be, it's all about marking and then competitions as well. The idea that you're in a room full of critics rather than a room full of encouraging and supportive friends is, it's a world of difference, isn't it, in terms of what you can achieve under those circumstances.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I do think that's powerful. And I don't know, I remember going into my grade 5 piano exam, which is the pinnacle of my piano playing. And I really don't think my playing reflects the fact that I have grade 5. Because it's sad. I love the piano, but I'm not super instinctive with it in the way that I have been in my solo instruments. But I remember getting into my exam and looking up at the examiner, and I thought, that is the mother of my old violin teacher, and I happen to know she is a concert pianist. What are we going to do? Because suddenly it's like this big kind of, I know that she's amazing at piano. She's going to see right through me. Oh my gosh. And she knows that I'm a violinist, not a pianist. So,
oh, goodness.
I think those kinds of things can really get in your head. And yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying about kind of when we play, when we perform, it's something very physical and emotional that we're conveying. And actually, you need to feel safe enough to be able to do that, don't you? And actually, if you're not feeling safe, that will affect your performance. You've got to be ready to go all out and really, really give it everything. And I think that's where the battle can really have an impact, I think, because if you're having a debate in your own mind about whether or not people think you're good enough to be there, that is something which will really affect the way that you put yourself across, and having that courage and that vulnerability to do that.
Absolutely. And being able to feel, because I often feel like musicians have something inside they want to get out, but they have to feel in a safe space to do that, and where it's almost like bearing your uttermost soul, and then thinking that someone might come up to you afterwards and be like, it's all right, you just
Definitely.
but I really don't believe that the world of professional music needs to be like that, and I think in many circles it isn't like that, and obviously in some it is, and it would be kind of a bit idealistic of me to say that it isn't at all, but I sort of wonder whether the problem that sort of, say, student onwards musicians are experiencing when they're trying to work out at what point they can ask for the money they actually want, at what point they can say, yeah, if you want me to come and play at this, that's fine, but actually I have a baby, and what adjustments are you going to make for me so that I can do this, given the circumstances, so they can do these things. That it's so difficult to know how you get from the child in an exam room wondering whether they're going to get like 77 or 107, do you know what I mean? To being that person. And also I think there's a huge thing to be said about making demands, and this is quite prevalent in the performing arts, but probably in other sectors as well, is that, but in music, making demands is seen as being diva-esque. And there are jokes about like people having ridiculous riders and things like that, and actually I had another guest on my podcast who was saying that apparently the thing about having ridiculous riders was to do with checking whether the sort of production team had read it properly, so they would notice they were like, if you can deliver like this particular brand of flowers or like type of flowers in my dressing room, then you can also deliver the actual things that are important.
That's so funny. Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
It does, yeah, but still, and I think possibly more for women than men, although perhaps not as well. It certainly felt that we just have to kind of take what we're given, and as a result, musicians end up playing in freezing cold venues and not getting food and not get, and then like not getting paid what they should be paid at the other, as well as these sort of um, slightly questionable circumstances they end up in because perhaps they don't ask for what they need from performances.
Yeah, and I do think that this year, what we have seen sort of more broadly is that along with the pandemic, that has meant that there's been a massive increase in home working. And it hasn't been possible to have children in childcare for a lot of the time. So, what I've noticed is that things that I used to feel like I had to apologise for, such as having children downstairs who may or may not be having a tantrum at the time. We did actually have an event in our house while I was on a work call where my children decided to zip one of our cats inside their suitcase. And my husband discovered this, and there was such a rumpus downstairs. The cat was very upset. My husband was very upset with them for doing it. They were very upset at what they'd done and being caught and all that kind of thing. There was just utter like pandemonium. And if that had happened sort of pre-COVID, I think I would have been utterly mortified. I wasn't thrilled, actually, I have to say. But there's been a whole acceptance of the fact that we are whole people, and it's not just you on a screen. There's a whole house behind you, and that house has other people in it, and that includes children. So I think there's more of an acceptance in the general workspace of the fact that women have children. And I don't know, it's interesting. I was talking to a friend recently who's going for a job interview, and we were talking about this whole issue of like, how do you manage the fact that she doesn't know if she may have other children in the future? And she said, no, I cannot talk about anything to do with the fact that I have kids. That has to be something which is completely off the table, because if you even mention it, there'll be a perception that you don't know how to handle yourself and that you won't be committed to the company. But I do think that one of the legacy things about this year will be that actually that starts to change. And I do hope that that's something that is permanent and lasting. I mean, from a sort of quality of life point of view, I think that working from home can be very good for everyone and for families. And I don't know, personally, I did not enjoy commuting in my sort of corporate days. I found that very tiring. I had like a number of sort of health, long-term chronic things that were going on that were caused by stress, which was caused by many things. But actually, I think for me, commuting to work, working in a massive open plan office with like 200 or 300 other people, if you were to set up for like my nightmare scenario, that would be quite close to being it. So I know for some people, they love that, and they love the whole sort of like joint working environment and having people that they're there with. But I do think that this whole thing about home working, that's opening up a load of avenues for people who, particularly women, who are just like, actually, I'm not just this worker drone. I do have stuff going on in my life outside of this. And I do hope that that extends to more than just office workers in cities, but actually for all women across the whole of society, whatever they do. Just this understanding that children do exist, we do give birth to them, and then we do actually have an obligation to raise them, because it's the pressure on both sides, isn't it? The pressure to be 100% professional and act as if you don't have kids, but then in your parenting be 100% present and emotionally able to bring up children who are well-rounded, and all of the psychological things they need to be well cared for, loved, nourished, all of those things. The result for parents is just that is so much pressure to be under all the time, because you're having to live two lives at the same time and sort of act as if you're only living one. So I think in a crude way, lockdown has shown a lot of those things to be completely impossible. And I do think that parents have had an intolerable amount of pressure put on them. But it's just what happens next, I guess. And I hope that will be something that extends to the performing arts as well, so that there can be this understanding that it's possible to be a wonderfully talented performer, but also be a parent. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, on the office side of things as well, I just think that it's shown what's possible with people working from home. It's shown how, people can do the things that those of us work from home all the time know how to do, like putting loads of washing on at lunchtime or whatever. Like I literally can't imagine how I would ever manage like my house. Not that I manage it terribly well, but how I would do that without being able to do those things. And the amount of time that's being spent on commuting and so on. I think from the performing arts point of view, obviously that is an industry in which you generally have to be in a space in order to do work more so than you do in an office. Certainly the remote work options are not impossible, but they're not, there is a distinctive loss, I think, of experience. What I'd love to see for parents, and what does happen in a minority of places, but hopefully a growing minority, is an understanding that, you know, really you don't want to have to choose between being a touring musician and a parent. If you're an opera singer and you have to go away for months in order to star in an opera, how do you make that choice? You know, if you have to choose between one or the other, that's like an impossible choice. It involves giving up an enormous part of who you are on either side, and it's not good for anybody. It's not good for the parent, it's not good for the child. It's not good for the industry if they choose not to do it ultimately and to stay at home. Then you know, the industry loses out on a talent and an artist. But I just love what you said about being whole people. I think this really resonates, in my opinion, with what I see musicians going through, in terms of, it's almost like trying to identify what of them can go to the world and can go out to audiences and go into their publicity material and their social media and everything else. And the thing that I hear over and over again is this appropriate for my Facebook page? Should I put this picture of my, you know, child, or is that like selling? It's not like selling my child for my, but you know, this is the debate that people have, isn't it? How much of yourself do you show? And I don't have I mean, I think a lot of that is the answer is down to personal choice, essentially. But I do think that if you don't feel 100% yourself, it's much more difficult to be a convincing, wholeheartedly convincing performer, I would say, because if you feel like you're holding something back, or that something isn't right, and you've got to make these balances. I mean, I don't know if I understood how that felt before I became a parent, but to me there's like an almost physical feeling of trying to juggle different sides of yourself. I can feel it in my head.
Yes,
like
it's
how
a gear
that
change
feels
in your brain, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because during lockdown, I changed my whole work pattern. Normally, I would have fixed days in the week where I do like either appointments or like, you know, writing or whatever it might be. But actually, during lockdown, it was kind of like morning, one parent looks after the kids, afternoon, the other one does. And like that is wonderful in terms of like holding space for your own work needs and having some time each day where you can actually get on with things. But in terms of trying to stay sane and cope with, you know, all the stress and it, you know, I think often it's very helpful to not have to be doing everything all at once. I personally, and I know there are people who do what I do and who like they would have a child on their lap in a call like this. I've never been very good at that. When I'm with my kids, they really do want my attention, and now they're getting to an age where they really can be very creative in the ways that they find to get that attention. But you know, I've never felt super. I've always had babies who would cry on demand on camera. I remember I did one call with a client when my youngest son, I think he was 4 months old, and he cried the entire he'd been asleep, and this was a little routine we had when I was I wasn't on maternity leave, but I was in that sort of postpartum phase. But for quite a long time I'd give him a big bottle of milk before the call, then he'd go to sleep next to me, and I'd spend an hour with a client, and they wouldn't know that he was there because he would just be ever so, like, he was so chilled. He was such a great baby. But one day he just decided, I've had enough of that, actually. And so he just started to cry, and he was on camera just crying and crying. And in the end, I said, after about 40 minutes, I said to the client, let's rebook this. We'll pretend we never did this. We'll do the whole session again at a time when he's not around. And I turned off the camera, and he just looked at me and smiled straight away. And I was like, you did that on purpose. I know. It's
They
fine.
always know. They're
They
extremely
do know.
clever and resourceful.
Yeah, they're very focused on. So I think for a lot of parents, doing, like, some people are very, very good at sort of coping with all of those things. I've known people who've done like webinars that they're presenting on while they're feeding a baby, and like some people are great at that, but for me that is just, it's so stressful. So
I can't concentrate on it.
Well, exactly. I like to be able to show up with my best brain and gear, because I do think for women we have, you know, more so than men, we have a lot more to prove, because as soon as people know that you're having a baby or you've just had a baby, I don't know if you've had this too, Katie, but it's this whole thing of baby brain. So you say something wrong, or you make a mistake, or you double book yourself. Oh, that's baby brain. You know, and I've known women who said, you know, when you push the baby out, you also push quite a lot of your brain out as well. And I just think that's such a negative way to go about that whole thing. Actually, we're not worse human beings. We're not sort of good for nothing because we've had kids. I actually think
We're
that
thinking about a bit more than we were before for a
well,
start.
exactly. Like,
Yeah.
we're so much more resilient. Like my kids have taught me stuff that I never would have known sort of without going through a parent. I think they help us to reprocess our own childhoods, and like there's a whole load of emotional development that comes like when you like, you know, your kids doing stuff triggers memories of like what you've done with your parents, and you can remember a whole load of good and bad stuff that, like, you know, you just think, gosh, I totally forgotten about that. But I don't know, I really think that being parents makes us better people. We do have to commit to that, you know, individually, and we have to say, I'm not going to be the flaky person who's like, oh, I've got kids, so I said I was going to do this, but actually now I can't. You know, that you wouldn't really be able to get away with that if you didn't have the kids. So you do have to sort of decide to show up in a certain way, but at the same time, I just don't think it's something that we should apologise for or be stigmatised for. I think that in almost every case, it makes us better versions of ourselves.
Absolutely, and unquestionably adds depth, which in music is very important. I mean, obviously there are hundreds, thousands, millions of musicians who perform with or write music with enormous depth who don't have children. But for me personally, my whole life and everything that goes on in it has infinitely more depth because I have a child. And it definitely comes out in what I do, both like
Well,
musically, professionally, anything else.
It's not about kids or not, it's about experience, isn't it? And as individuals, we all go through, you know, a lifetime of things. And so that adds to what you bring to all of your performances, doesn't it? That has a huge impact.
Exactly. But I do believe that, to come back to what I think is potentially quite a nice conclusion, I don't normally get conclusions out of conversations, but I feel like what we're saying is, in order to be a happy and successful musician, a part of that has to be being able to be content with yourself as a whole person. And I think that I mean, that's not something that we encourage in children or have historically encouraged in children in general, is it? And hopefully, I mean, hopefully more so as we become more aware of these things as sort of generations go on. But you know, the way we educate children in music certainly is very kind of well, like you said, I can't remember the word you used, like certificate based and kind of milestone based. And I think there's a lot of milestones in children and education and development and so on that are, you know, we seem to love milestones as a society. And that, yeah, there's something that then has to happen where that almost then needs to be left behind, and you need to almost be able to say, I've done that now, and now I'm me, and this is my work. And you know,
it's the learning a particular way of being, and then I think you get to a certain point where you need to unlearn all of those things. And I speak to a lot of women who have been through that kind of thing of growing up, and maybe they do have natural leadership abilities, and so they're told that they're bossy at a young age, and then you get to a certain point where actually you've become such a sanitized version of yourself who won't offend other people, who has learned how to blend in really well. Actually, you need to find that inner fierceness again and be able to like show that leadership again. You need to find that side of yourself that you've been sort of squashing down or that you've put to one side, because that is actually what you bring to the table. That's how you find your most passionate energy.
I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. That was fab. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to me.
Oh, thanks for having me. I was so pleased to be asked, because I think it's so great to sort of combine these two elements. And I think, you know, for musicians, I don't want people to feel like they just have to put themselves in one box and be creative and nothing else. I think you can be fully creative and actually really enjoy the business elements of your own career. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about it.
Well, thank you for coming. It's been great. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening today. To find out what we're up to, do join our mailing list or follow us on social media. And if you'd like to support the podcast by buying me a coffee, you can do that on buymeacoffee.com. Thank you so much. See you next time.